Now, one of the first arguments that we make about Afrofuturism is that it was a word, like think of it as like a marketing coin word that describes a body of knowledge. And I know enough from our history that what we call jazz was not, we didn't call it that. We probably just thought we were out doing some dope music or whatever, and somebody came, okay, that's what it is. But everybody understands where it comes from. And in the American context, because one of the things that I don't have time to do the whole global thing today, but in the American context, the central figure that pulls these threads together in the 19th century is Martin Delany. Now, when you go online, they just say, oh, he's the father of black nationalism. No, he was much more than that. He was a scientist. He was a healthcare provider. He wrote this book, Principia Ethnology, which he becomes one of the first Americans to deal with medunature. And this is during the era of scientific racism. He writes the book Blake or the Huts of America before the Civil War as a series in opposition to what the book Uncle Tom's Cabin was about. And that's why in the North American tradition, this is considered the first black speculative literature. Or, as we say, for an enslaved African, freedom was like science fiction. Okay, they couldn't necessarily see a way out. And so even to write about it was like science fiction, because even in European science, they said if you were an enslaved African who wanted to be free, you were crazy. So Martin Delany was probably looked at as a crazy man. And I was talking with Philip Butler about this the other day, Dr. Philip Butler. I said, do you realize our generation, those people born after our parents' struggle, we're the first ones to have the most freedom to grow up without some of the obstacles our parents and grandparents do. Because when I went to Africa and I taught at Gimpa for a few weeks as a visiting scholar, and I visited Cape Coast Castle, and I said, to me, the African American was started in this slave castle. All these people that had different dialects that couldn't speak to each other. I said, Black Rage started in Cape Coast Castle, where you had people standing in there knee deep in feces and body waste with a little window to look out of where they couldn't breathe. And then they showed me the room where the Africans who were just so resistant, they smothered them to death. And then the ones who survived the Middle Passage, as I remember talking to some of the older people, and I didn't understand what it meant back in the time, they said during slavery, they killed the smart black people, or the ones, and that's why the ones that learned how to read. And then during segregation, they tried to drive the smart ones crazy. And then during busing, because I'm a child of the busing area, in the 70s, some of you might remember, around 6th, 7th grade, they give you this little test called the Slosson Intelligence Test. Yeah, that's to measure your intelligence. And I was telling my wife about it the other day, because my father, before he passed, sent me a bunch of letters from elementary school. And I remember, and I read the letter, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, your son, Ronaldo, he scored over 135 on this test. I didn't know what that meant. And then I looked it up. I was like, oh, that puts you in the top 2 percentile or whatever. And then I understood this, and during this time, they called something tracking. So after we get our civil rights, they found a way to systematically weed out the ones who they thought were smarter versus the ones who were not considered gifted. Because at a certain age, when we were all together, we made no distinction between the people who got free lunch or whatever. We all rode the bus together. And I remember I was envious of the guys who had a free lunch ticket. I asked my parents, why can't I get that? Because I'd rather eat that than the peanut butter and jelly sandwich you fixed for me. So we're the last generation where that class stratification thing was not an issue. Some of us live in a house, some of us might have lived in apartments, but we all rode the bus together. That we were the last one. We were the beginnings of the latchkey generation, where of the beginnings of divorce and children starting to come home and let themselves in, and me having to watch my younger brothers to make sure they get their duties done or whatever before my father gets home. So that's what I'm saying, that I love the term Africology, looking at this transgenerational, how things have changed, reflecting on it, where in our history, where are high points, what are some low points, what can we bring forward and reconfigure for right now. And that's why I say a good solid person to study and revisit is Martin Delany, his life. That how does this guy become? He was accepted into Harvard Medical School, but some of the white students protested, so he got put out, even though he had helped heal people in Pittsburgh from disease, because all the other white physicians had fled in Pittsburgh. And what's interesting about Philadelphia, this region going up to New York to the Hudson Valley, this is the part of America where a lot of this speculative tradition starts. You know, when you're talking about geometry, architecture, Freemasonry, all that going from Philadelphia up to the New York region, and then how Washington, D.C. is set up. And then you got to reevaluate, well, really, who was Benjamin Banneker?
In a world grappling with persistent inequalities and rapidly evolving technologies, the need for critical perspectives that illuminate the experiences of marginalized communities has never been more urgent. Dr. Reynaldo Anderson, in his profound discussion, Afrofuturist African American Society, Whither the People, offers a vital lens through which to examine the historical, present, and future trajectories of the African American experience. This video delves into the core tenets of Afrofuturism as presented by Anderson, not merely as a genre of speculative fiction, but as a dynamic framework for understanding and dismantling systemic oppression. We are not merely discussing the aesthetic of science fiction, but the very real, lived experiences of a people whose history is interwoven with both unimaginable trauma and extraordinary resilience. Anderson's analysis compels us to confront the ways in which historical narratives have been manipulated and suppressed to maintain power structures, and how these distortions continue to shape contemporary realities. Margins of mainstream discourse. By exploring the intellectual contributions of figures like Martin Delany, W.E.B. Du Bois, and others, we begin to appreciate the richness of a legacy that has often been relegated to fully grasp the significance of Anderson's insights, we must first situate ourselves within the complex landscape of historical and contemporary challenges faced by African Americans. From the brutal realities of slavery and the subsequent struggles for civil rights to the ongoing battles against systemic racism and economic inequality, the journey has been marked by both profound adversity and unwavering determination. The context is one where academic institutions, as Anderson points out, can perpetuate anti-black narratives, where the very concept of freedom has been historically ridiculed, and where intellectual contributions have been systematically undervalued. It is a context where the digital age, while offering new avenues for expression and connection, also presents new forms of exploitation and marginalization. Furthermore, we must acknowledge the global dimensions of this struggle. The interconnectedness of our world means that conflicts in one region, such as the war in Ukraine, can have profound repercussions for communities thousands of miles away. Anderson's emphasis on deglobalization and the need for greater African agency in global governance highlights the importance of understanding these interconnected dynamics. Within this landscape, Afrofuturism emerges as a powerful tool for reclamation and reimagination. It allows us to transcend the limitations of the present, to envision alternative futures, and to draw strength from the rich cultural heritage of the African diaspora. It is a philosophy that recognizes the importance of honoring ancestral roots while simultaneously embracing the potential of technological innovation and creative expression. In examining Anderson's discourse, we are not simply engaging in an academic exercise. We are participating in a vital conversation about the future of a community that has played a pivotal role in shaping the course of human history. This essay aims to illuminate the key themes and insights presented by Anderson, providing a framework for understanding the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. By doing so, we hope to contribute to a more just and equitable future for all.
Africa he was from was pride, and he took a lot of pride in his ethnicity, born free. And now they recognize him recently in the last generation. I believe they're in Pittsburgh now. Another key figure you have to go back and look at, W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, in the book I have up here, Dark Water, he has a short story in there called The Comet, which is, some people just call it science fiction, but what I love about Du Bois' work, his work is still grounded in social science, and he's saying, based upon America's history, he ever thought the race problem would be solved. And he wasn't the first person to say that, but as a social scientist, because he's still not given the credit for starting urban sociology. He gets his philosophical understanding of how to come up with a worldview studying in Germany. Because at that time, there was no nation called Germany when he was a young man. It was just a bunch of little states and duchies and dukedoms and so forth. But they put together a philosophy that was based on what they called the Volk, V-O-L-K, and hence the title of his soul, The Souls of Black Folk, in terms of, in English, to talk about how does this formerly enslaved population of Africans come up with a sophisticated worldview in a modern nation state that is one generation out of slavery? And so he's looking at it from that perspective. And then, of course, one of his opponents, Booker T. Washington, has a different philosophical perspective where it relates to training and some of the practical things that he thought African Americans needed at the time. And you have to mention Pauline Hopkins, the most popular selling author of African descent, late 19th century, early 20th century. She writes the book Of One Blood, which is kind of like the Wakanda story. A person of African descent in North America going back to Africa and discovering this civilization. And so this is like a Pan-African science fiction novel. And that's why I always tell people, before there's Octavia Butler and all these other people, you got to look at Pauline Hopkins, what her politics were. Now, to fast forward, the conflict and confusion. Now, this is what we see as graduate students, as young scholars coming in, late 80s, early 90s. The feminist scholar Barbara Christensen wrote The Race for Theory in 1987. Because what was happening in the United States towards the end of the Cold War, a lot of European intellectuals had immigrated to America, bringing their ideas with them, and they were not a part of the freedom movement that had happened in the 60s and early 70s. And so you begin to have this fracturing in terms of knowledge influence coming into the academy at the time. This term that we hear called postmodernism, post this, that, and the other. These were products of European immigrants that came here that towards the end of the Cold War was adopted in a widespread way that then come into conflict with our own understanding of our history, saying there were no more grand narratives. I was like, wait a minute, you can't tell me our struggle ain't grand. I was like, now I don't know you about this little country you come from over here, but to come from where we have come from is something that will stand the test of time in terms of that narrative being told. So you can't tell me there's not a grand narrative. So you see these ideas related to Lyotard, Derrida, and others, right around the same year when Molefi comes out and is advancing Afrocentricity. And that's why I told somebody, and I said, I probably told Molefi this and all this, what they did in the 90s will still be talked about 100 years from now when some of these people that are at these other schools are going to be forgotten. Because a lot of people in this room knows that a lot of these people that they advance here on TV, nobody talks about them outside of America, and that's just facts, as the young people say. You know, but you have to travel and put some stamps in your passport. And if you're really Afrocentric oriented, then I should see in your passport you going to South Africa, Ghana, somewhere, instead of Italy and Romania and some of these other places that you like going to. Because I'm one of them people, don't say you an Afrofuturist, but then you trying to break your neck to get to London this summer. Like people like me, Yatasha Womack, Stacey Robinson, we've all been to Africa. Because my thing is, if you say African in front of it, I want to know how your ideas work over there in conversation with the people who live there. Because they'll let you know what it might look like when it's practiced here. So, Sankofa, return, engage, and bring it here. Okay, we have this conflict in the 90s, Web 1.0, the internet gets started. I can't even imagine for what it's like for someone even older than me have to understand the internet and all this other stuff, because in 1995, I was 31 years old, and that's when graduate students started sending off their first emails. That's when you still had Netscape and all these other. I'm still mad at BET because I had a bunch of stuff on the email stuff they had set up that went away after a couple of years that I had saved up on there. So that's the 1.0 era email, and a gentleman, I've met Mark Derry, who coined the word, he'll tell you. He didn't arrive at it through no scholarship. He was just freshening up one day, getting ready for an interview when bing, he thought of Afrofuturism, and he does it in conversation with Greg Tate. And there's a whole story about that I hope Mark writes about it. Very ethical gentleman of European descent. But whether you're talking about older scholars that talk about Jahan Johns or the scholar who influenced Zora Neale Hurston, we have had ethical people of European descent attempt to try and describe what they were looking at. And that's why if you go on the internet, he has no issue of how I've come in and revised all of that. And I had the gall to do that because I remember a speech that it was either somebody from the Temple Circle gave, or one of the other black study scholars said that Europeans have been some of the best students of Africans in history. So I tell them, I was like, you know, that we've taught them before. Now the problem is, in these days, you got to protect your intellectual property, you know, because that's simply the world we live in relation to capital. Now, senior year of college, war is declared. Some of you in this room remember when Patrick Buchanan said, it is a cultural war. As critical as the kind of nation we shall be was the Cold War itself, for the war is for the soul of America. So 2 weeks from now will be the 30th anniversary of the announcement of the culture war. So I don't understand academics and scholars that are out here acting like we're not in the middle of a war. We had the war on drugs, and what was that? A war on who?
Black people.
We had the Cold War. Now, the culture war, you know who he's talking about. So all that has done is metastasize into all this alt-right stuff we see today, because for a generation, once they came to the understanding that they're in a culture war, they've been institutionalizing their ideas, their money, and their systems to fight the war. And so that's why I don't waste time with people that want to come and tell me, oh, brother, you need to get some chakras and some other stuff. I was like, man, we're in the middle of a war. Our kids are being mentally destroyed in these schools, and you all are sitting up here happy to see a Negro get promoted on TV to something that white folks control. Like that's a win for us.
That's right.
And the systems that have been set up continue. They never stopped trying to undermine, destroy, co-opt, or control what we create. That's just facts. It's been a 30-year publicly announced culture war. So my response when I started theory building, I said, okay, that's why I said, let me see what the Temple Circle was writing about at that time. The same time Derry and these others are having these interviews up in Manhattan, Dr. Keto, Dr. Asante, and others is right there in these books here. Keto's book has influenced me a lot because he talks about this African geography of reason. So if we understand what Eurocentrism really is, it's an artificially created region at the end of the Eurasian landmass that they created ideologically, and their body of reason comes from that. I have no problem with that. So for me as a person of African descent, so when I look across and see my ancestry I identify with comes from West Africa, and so some of the ideas, and then along with what happens through the Caribbean, because you know we lost some family there, to North America. So that's my geography of reason. Because one of the things they will tell you when you're putting theory together, this is what they told us in grad school, they'll be like, well, black people, they're militant. You know, because militant is like a substrategy to theory, because we're emotional, angry. Oh, you're angry. I'm like, if you look at what happened, even James Baldwin said you don't wake up mad every day, something is wrong with you. So what? So that's what I'm saying. So my geography of reason tells me, and based upon citing their own thing, their own philosopher, John Locke, in the Second Treatise says, anybody who enslaves you is your enemy. So that's not me being anti-what? I'm citing your own people said that. If you've enslaved, we are political enemies. So therefore, through reason, I have to come up with a philosophy to defeat you. So yeah, I don't argue with scholars when they ask, well, that replacement theory, that's right. I agree with it. We're trying to replace you. We're replacing white supremacy. That's right. You know, so don't argue with them. They've declared the culture war. It's metastasized into what it is. So then you got to figure out how, as a person of African descent, do I fight back with my mind, my money, or whatever? And that's really what an intelligent person does. So in there, page number, because I know I got the scholars in the house watching whatever. Keto says right here, as a futurologist, she or he can speculate, engage beyond the next century to create in sharp contrast a time map on which to trace the events of the past, create history through action in the present, and plot the path of possible future action. Now that's an African-centered version of futurity right there, and it's been there for almost 30 years. So anybody that says this is not Afrocentric, they don't read. That's why we got too many darn TED Talk people that don't want to read a book because it's got too many pages, and they write blogs ad nauseum, and they don't know what they're talking about. And some of them have PhDs. You know, not sociological people. There's studies that tell 95% of the people that do a PhD don't do squat 2 years after they're over with. So that tells you 95% of the people that are doctorate, other than their dissertation, you can't talk to them about anything. And that's just facts. They did a study on it. You know, they said they don't write about anything 5 years after the dissertation. So the people sitting in this room that have been writing, those are the 5%, the people who write 5 years after the PhD. So they're saying the exceptional people are still writing 5 years after they're done. So some of these people, and that's why you got people in the classroom up there teaching and beating up on the students, and they haven't written anything worth anything since before social media, and will come and tell you whether you right or wrong, and they haven't written anything in 20 years. Finally, on building the theory, Anna Everett, she cites people from the Temple Circle there. The revolution will be digitized, Afrocentricity and the digital public sphere. It's right there. Afrocentric, that's 20 years ago. 20 years ago, Anna Everett, still teaching out in California. I think she's at Santa Cruz now. Now, these are the people as graduate students we're reading as graduate students. And so that's why, for me, as an ethical person, I got to always say, these are who my teachers were. I'm influenced by who I'm building on, because I'm standing on the shoulders of other people. That, as I had to tell some of my graduate students, I said, man, Malefi's generation, some of them were threatened with death at conferences just for putting together black caucuses, just to meet with each other. People come harass them at night, knock on the door while they're in the hotel. And that's why I know something was with them, because I'm a former Marine. So you kind of understand my mentality. If people come at me a certain way, we're trained to fight a whole classroom of people and win. So, you know, so that's what I'm saying. These are some of the obstacles our scholars put up with just to be thought of as scholarly. And I don't have time to even talk about their work wasn't respected because it had to be on a trade press or Africa World Press. Everybody knows those black bookstores we had a generation ago. That's the only place you could get it. Now in the last 20 years, because they know it's a thing, now you can get your work put into their journals as they note. (2015). At this point, when this happens, we had a big meeting at Princeton. It was called Ferguson is the Future. Mike Brown, his uncle was in my class that semester. He was killed and murdered. And I remember he was going through some post-traumatic stress at the time. I had students out in the streets protesting. That movement of the Ferguson Rebellion did not turn out properly because you had too many opportunists that came in with ulterior motives to take away the narrative and the voice of the people who made the rebellion start. And that movement was started by working class and working poor young black people. That's who started it. And the middle class black people joined in because people that know about St. Louis, they were making money off of giving us tickets. That's how they paid for some of their bills of these area municipalities. So that shocked them when they saw professors and lawyers out there marching with the young people. And because and then all these other groups with these acronyms and hashtags. I remember we saw communists, we saw this, that, and the other before black. Man, by the time some of these people showed up Black Lives Matter, the worst stuff was already over. You know, and they still don't. There are a lot of uninvestigated killings that happened during that time. And so that's why those people, I remember when they came to our school, I had to talk to my young people. I said, look, this is what the civil rights movement was. It was a system developed over generations to oppose a system. It starts with the Niagara movement but comes to fruition in the 60s. It takes a system to fight a system. These people that come here don't have a system. Some of these people are just showing up to get internet followers for a brand. to sell books, to get on TV. So my job as your advisor, because I don't want to get that call from your parents, Dr. Anderson, why is my son or daughter in jail? Why is so-and-so shot? So the first thing I had to tell them, I said, look, don't accept any money. And that sounded crazy to them. Now, what have we seen in the news about the people who took money? Now, their ethics and all that have been crushed now in light of everyone, because I said, what's going to happen? The bill is going to come due, and they're going to find out who all took money during the Ferguson Rebellion. There were people that got $50,000 to get a barbershop going because they looked like they had a couple hundred people following them. You had elected officials help suppress the people's movement because and you can't even put it on the Republicans. The Democratic Party were afraid there was about to be an independent black movement going on. So you had some black Democrats period, along with some unions and scholars that showed up that wanted to get their grant hustle on from other schools, you know, to study the phenomenon. I remember some guy had an Ivy League shirt standing on the fence while we out there sweating or whatever, looking at us like we are just a grant in motion, you know. So when that's, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it because they worried about becoming a trending topic on Twitter or something. I said, man, them people, who cares? So what? I said, the scholarship is going to catch up with all these people, and they're not going to be judged that well, you know? And so this is going to be an intergenerational struggle, so don't get caught up in the moment. And so we talked about some of these things at Princeton in 2015. And I remember as people were talking, I was probably the person that I know I didn't come across as sweet. I told the people that, look, I said, look, I don't love you. My people out here getting shot, and y'all up in here like rubbing each other on the back like it's going to be, man, we up here got all nice stuff to drink, and some of my people been in jail down there, been shot with rubber bullets. So no, I don't love y'all right now. And people was like, ugh. But you know who was happy I said it? The young people. The young people came up afterwards and said, man, thank you for saying that. And because I also made this statement. I said, if you all had to vote on your future right now, if it was up to me, nobody over 45 should be allowed to vote, because they ain't going to be alive long enough to see the results of it. That upset some people too. And I saw this older woman, I'm going to be in the future. No, you're not. The way you know, bad as your body, looking all sickly and whatever, you're not even going to be here in 30 years. I might not be here. Just let the young, because when you just got the young people vote, they vote for stuff different than somebody who's scared of losing a job or having white folks mad at them. The 35 and under crowd, they're fearless. They have nothing to lose. You know, people that got something to lose should not be allowed to vote on people's future. That's my opinion. If you got something to lose, you do not need to vote. You can give some advice. We need the advice, but you're voting from a position of fear. And I want people that vote who are voting from a position of courage and victory, not people who are afraid of losing something. And so all of this came out at the Ferguson is the Future, and that was my little small contribution, which is probably why I have not been invited back to that place. But hey, you know, my money has not suffered. You know, I'm gonna still get my beans and whatever when I get what I like to eat. So, and we just got it. We're at that point now where people of us that got to start doing some truth speaking now and telling the truth, because a lot of people are not doing that. Oh, let me get to this next slide here. Here we go. Now, here's a breakdown of what I call where we are now at this moment. To have Afrocentricity and Afrofuturism, how they work together, got to have Afrocentricity present, dealing with agency, location, because some people going to the future are acting out of dislocation. You know, we got different words for people that are dislocated from their identity. I don't need to go into it. This African-centered geography of reason, because once you operate from that, then you understand the politics. Why? I ain't lying. I'll tell you what, if people didn't know where Ukraine was, they know where it is now. Now, in European historiography, y'all know in class, we don't even study the Eastern Europeans. They're not considered European because they're Slavic peoples, because they have the Cyrillic alphabet. What we think of as Europe is Western Europe, the Catholics, the Protestants, not the Orthodox. And that's just facts. But now we done learned more about that region since February. We probably know more about it than the state that we're next to where you live. Y'all probably know more about it than West Virginia because of the geopolitics involved. So I just say the location of African people in time and space with agency. It currently operates as the high culture of the African diaspora and African practitioners. And I don't run away from saying, oh, why you say high culture? I'm like, look, anytime you got a group of bright people that's doing science, art, that's called high culture. No, I'm not doing what the trap music people are doing. Okay? And that's why and we demonstrated that when we did the Carnegie Hall Festival for 2 months this year. If you look at it, we had it all over New York City, 80 different locations. Nobody got shot, stabbed, beat up, robbed, disrespected, or nothing because, you know, people will put more value in some nonsense that make news than a lot of African people coming together, sitting together, dignified, appreciating art, culture, and science and philosophy. So that's why I told the New York Times, the paper of record for liberals, I said, no, this is the high culture of the African diaspora right now. And I stand on that. And I got no pushback from their editorial people. It's characterized by 5 dimensions: metaphysics, aesthetics, theoretical and applied science, social sciences, and programmatics. And this is one of the arguments during the height of the pandemic, where some people were mad at me because I was advocating taking the Moderna shot. I said, African people believe in science. Y'all out here, I was like, you know, there were scientists in Africa. We invented mathematics and architecture and all this. You have to have science to do that. Why are you anti-science? You know? So these are discussions on a basic level people have been having. The first one, metaphysics. What is that? That's an ontology or a meaning of existence. Epistemology, truth functional aspects of knowledge. Cosmogony, or origin of the universe. Cosmology, the structure of the universe. And so that's where I look at the African traditional religions. You know, other ethnic groups, whether you're going into Islam or whatever, they have their cosmology. Cosmogony is all situated in a certain way to reinforce their metaphysics. And they bring that metaphysics with them into their art, how they produce art, and all of their other qualities that they consider what it means to be them as representing them as a human beings. Here's aesthetics. Art, literature, and performance produced by African peoples. That's why, for my brothers and sisters that don't even like reading, I just say, okay, Black Panther. All right. Oh, I got it. All right, because I know they're not going to read nothing. You know, or, you know, just, I mean, you know, it's just facts. They're not going to read the book I tell them to read. I say, okay, because in Black Panther, they're bringing together an African worldview in terms of the ancestral plane. They're bringing together African clothes, languages, and so forth. Now, the part that didn't go viral, I'm like, and no African stuff that I've heard is the CIA man, the hero. Now, that was the major flaw I had with it. And I had problems with him going to Geneva saying, we going to help whatever, when he should have been going to the Africa over in Addis Ababa. But but like I tell people, and I wrote about it, we can't expect Ryan Coogler, who had to deal with Hollywood. They just wanted to make some money, and they now are awakened to the fact that, oh, there's a lot of money in this. But the thing is, as scholars, I got to give people a framework to understand what's being produced, so you can understand why people like it, dislike it, or what's making it. And it works right now because there's a major Black consciousness movement in the world right now. You got a Black woman vice president in Colombia. They're even recognizing the indigenous people in India as a Black president. And that was the first time I've heard, and we understood as scholars what India was about, but this is the first time I've heard them say it. The indigenous people versus the Aryan speaking Indian people. The indigenous people are dark Black people. And that's why I say, that tells you who were the original Indians. That's why, but they call them the indigenous people. So that tells you that them people that's doing that Hindu nationalism are the invaders that came down in there. The Aryans, and that's why their stuff, Hitler and all them would borrow some of their symbols. And that's why some of the alt-right now, they're talking about Kali or Shiva now, saying a cycle of destruction is going. They're tapping into Hindu metaphysics because before the Aryan peoples crossed the Caucasus and all, they're going into all this metaphysical stuff that goes back to Hindu metaphysics. And they're saying that. So they're prepared to do all this stuff that's tied to January 6th, and they combine it with technology and accelerationism and say, oh yes, we're going to have destruction first. So they're letting you know, before we will accept black and brown people or Jewish people or whatever as human beings, we will destroy this thing rather than engage their humanity and have a real democracy. Now they've told you that. Now, when somebody didn't Maya Angelou say when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. So that's not me saying I'm anti them. That means, oh, he told me he's my enemy, so I'm going to prepare. So yeah, my wife will tell you during the pandemic. So while other people was out here praying, Dr. Anderson went and got some ammunition and my Cobra pump, and I was prepared to do what's ever necessary to deal with those type of people in self-defense. Because they've told me who they coming for. Right. So why we act like they're not trying to come for us? There, a quote on the site on there, when they said, well, what about this black speculative? Look at the citation closely. It says, Pfeiffer, 1975, Black American Speculative Literature, a checklist. In there, he's providing, and I'll even tell people, he's a white man too. He'll tell you, Black speculative literature emerges roughly the same time European science fiction does. European science fiction emerges out of a totally different set of circumstances, where black speculative lit and experience emerges as in opposition to scientific racism, the enslavement of Africans. So it had a different set of circumstances that influences its creation. So when I hear people of African descent say, oh, yeah, this is African, and it's a subset or a subgenre of sci-fi. So why are you recolonizing yourself under Europeans again when the scholarship is right there that's saying we've set up our own thing? But see, that's why you're going to see people that, because they want to get the Booker Award, the Pulitzer, or whatever. Yes, I do this, and and those of us who want to write for freedom and having our own thing, our own vine and fig tree, as they say in another religion, they're going to go that way. So the scholarship there, so that's what, 50 years ago it was identified. So that's why I debate people when they say, well, I do black science fiction. And then, but they don't even know, see, there are people out here saying stuff and they don't even know where this terminology come from. One of the biggest science fiction writers in the world, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, early 19th century, early 20th century, who was also a peer of Du Bois, said, feminism is for white women. It is for white women to assess white men in the governance of the world. Feminism. That's how she defines it. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, or Gilman Perkins, one of them hyphenated names like that, from England. She writes about that. But she's running around, she's a peer of H.G. Wells. So the people who start this speculative literary movement, I've said H.G. Wells, Martin Delany, all these people were also sophisticated political people that created what we now call science fiction and speculative thought. They weren't just some people, out here chewing bubblegum and whatever. It was connected to their politics, and it was informed by a certain metaphysics. And that's why they wrote it the way they wrote it. They're dealing with physics now and culture. This came out in the last decade, linking Adinkras to theoretical physics. So when people like Malcolm X said, oh, I ain't leave nothing in Africa, look what you left in Africa. They're now understanding that Africans were dealing with high levels of physics and theoretical science at that time. And that's why the gentleman who's dealing with that was a part of the Obama White House. I can't think of his name right now, was at the University of Maryland dealing with theoretical, drawing these connections between African science and theoretical physics. Social science. Let me get on through here. So an application. And then programmatics. So what kind of programming are you putting as a reflection of the philosophy? Unveiling Visions was the very first Afrofuturist exhibition in this country that included a large group of artists. We had over 80 of them. We supported it with scholarship. We put out 2 books, Afrofuturism 2.0 and then the Black Speculative Arts Movement. Because one of the things we insisted upon, we're not going to be out there just making up stuff from like at the back of a Cracker Jack box. We're going to make sure that everything we talk about and put in the community is based upon scholarship. BSAM is one of those movements, the Black Speculative Arts Movement. So we put our theory into practice. Another one I like is one of our students, Michelle Taylor, has put together the Sankofa Summer School, which is a virtual school to deal with education issues. And here we are in South Africa, in Johannesburg, 4 years ago, talking with people on the continent, organizing around these concepts. We had a whole classroom full of young people there that were excited. We gave away books and materials that they can go with. And now if you talk about Afrofuturism, South Africa is probably one of the, in the top 5 dealing with the topic. And it's really one of the top ones on the African continent really getting in front of this. 4 pillars for a vision of Africological leadership. Transgenerational African leadership and Afrofuturism. Got to understand what is Moore's Law, or some people say Moore's Law plus and AI. Since 2018, where you see the introduction of AI and bots, and then COVID, where a lot of production and a lot of other creativity moved onto social platforms, we have this sense of time speeding up because we don't control our space and time. Malefi wrote in the book on Malcolm X's essays, he or she that controls time and space controls your destiny. So this is about time and space. Foresight, look and see where things are going. Insight, understanding why they're happening. And then oversight, like GPS, connecting all the dots. Why is what happening on the Eurasian land continent with the Ukraine war important? How does it impact us? That's having a GPS kind of mentality. Why is the war in Ukraine have some of our people starving in Africa? In a multipolar world, what does this look like? They talk about the metaverse, which is basically, you know, that's really, you're going to voluntarily put yourself into the matrix. You're going to let the metaverse babysit your kid because you don't want to spend a few dollars for an after school activity and then wonder why they turn out in these streets all acting all foolish. Keto in his book talks about a pluriverse, where there's a multiple ways of looking at the world and universe. We're in an area of deglobalization now. The supply chains, because I remember I noticed it at the dollar store now, all the prices started going up where we got stuff because the stuff from China wasn't getting here on time. So now they're saying deglobalization, we got to move manufacturing back to the home country. And now they love African Union now. Will the AU get a seat at the table? February, they need a Security Council seat. And then economic. We need to make them a part of the G20. Why? 100 years ago, European thinkers said, we will not continue to dominate the world unless we continue to control Africa and Latin America. They said that 100 years ago. So Africans are going to be, hey, we give them a seat. Because guess what? If we give them these seats, that means they're going to be our allies against the New World Order of China and the junior partner, Russia, on the Eurasian landmass. Because in their philosophy, they call Eurasia the world island. And whoever controls the world island controls the world. So if you look at Europe and then you throw in Russia, China, and India don't care, we just want our gas, that's a majority of the world is not supporting Europe right now. So what Malcolm X said, you got how many African seats in the UN vote? So to me, I was so proud of the Africans saying, no, we ain't taking a side. So what has happened since then? Biden, they came over, well, we're going to give Africa $600 billion for development. And the Africans have said, all right, what you got? All of a sudden, they're getting grain shipments coming in. The Russians are letting grain shipments come in. Because I look at it simply, without reading the book, if I know I got 2 bullies in the neighborhood stronger than me, and they fighting each other, I want them to keep fighting each other. Because that means they are too weak to come beat up on me, and I can keep doing push-ups. Yeah, y'all keep fighting. I'm going to keep, I want y'all to fight about 10 years while I build these muscles up and get strong enough to say no on my own. So to me, as people, some of the leftists, well, where do you stand? I said, look, I don't have a dog in that fight. That's a European land war. I think Russia is wrong, but NATO is not right. Because NATO invaded Africa. Africans know NATO's been used to kill so many Africans. And so and they're using black people on MSNBC telling these little pity potty stories. And you got thousands of people dying in the Congo and Ethiopia, and they had nothing to say. And that's why history is not going to view the black members of the CNN and MSNBC that intelligently. All of them. I don't care. Joy Reid, all of them are going to look at it. They were limited. Or them not knowing depending on their salary. So they couldn't say what they wanted to say. As I said, referencing Upton Sinclair, sometimes your salary dictates what you're allowed to say. So challenges: digitization, miniaturization, quantum computing, biotech, climate change, neo-fascism. So what can people do? We got to connect climate crisis to colonialism, reparations. All this stuff has to come together if people are serious about it. So, but you got to understand where your agency and geography of reason comes from, because I'm not going to support other people's stuff. So that means the first thing I'm about, where are you on reparations? Because I know whatever you all are going to decide what you need to do to save yourself. My folk need resources so they can survive too. And I'm not going to get behind you unless we have some reparations as part of this deal. Period. And that's a non-negotiable thing, non-negotiable.
Dr. Reynaldo Anderson's discussion, Afrofuturist African American Society Within the People, serves as a potent exploration of the multifaceted challenges and opportunities facing the African American community, framed through the lens of Afrofuturism. This framework, as Anderson highlights, is not merely a genre of science fiction, but a critical tool for understanding historical traumas, analyzing present realities, and envisioning future pathways for liberation. One of the central themes is the critique of anti-black sentiment within academia and broader intellectual spheres. Anderson, echoing the sentiments of critic Upton Sinclair, points out how knowledge can be suppressed to maintain tenure and promote biased narratives. This suppression is not a passive phenomenon. It is an active mechanism to uphold systemic racism. The acknowledgement of figures like Martin Delany, a 19th century pioneer in black nationalism and speculative literature, underscores the long history of African American intellectual contributions that have been systematically marginalized. The discussion then transitions to the complex perception of freedom in African American history. Dr. Anderson highlights the ridicule faced by early African Americans who dared to seek freedom, drawing a parallel to the incredulity often associated with science fiction. This analogy emphasizes the radical nature of envisioning a reality beyond oppression. However, he also acknowledges the generational progress, noting that younger generations enjoy freedoms that were unimaginable to their ancestors, albeit freedoms still shaped by historical traumas. A crucial aspect of Anderson's analysis is the recognition of African American contributions to speculative traditions in social science. Figures like Benjamin Banneker, Martin Delany, and W.E.B. Du Bois are celebrated for their intellectual prowess and their ability to blend social science with fiction, thereby offering a nuanced understanding of race relations and urban sociology. Du Bois's work, in particular, stands as a testament to the power of combining empirical observation with imaginative storytelling to critique and reshape societal narratives. The intellectual legacy of African Americans post-slavery is further explored through the lens of diverse philosophical perspectives. The concept of Volk, a term denoting a people or nation, is examined in the context of shaping a modern worldview among formerly enslaved Africans. The conflict between the perspectives of leaders like Booker T. Washington and Pauline Hopkins highlights the internal debates within the African American community regarding identity, representation, and strategies for advancement. While Washington advocated for economic self-sufficiency and gradual progress, Hopkins challenged the status quo through her literary works, emphasizing the importance of cultural and intellectual resistance. The discussion then delves into the interplay of African ideas with modern digital culture. Anderson underscores the importance of understanding African concepts in their local contexts, emphasizing their practical implications. The evolution of the internet in the 1990s and its impact on cultural studies are also considered, highlighting the ways in which technology can both empower and marginalize communities. The persistence of cultural and intellectual struggles in African American society is a recurring theme. Anderson emphasizes the importance of protecting intellectual property in a capitalist environment, recognizing the ongoing cultural war as a continuation of historical conflicts. He calls for awareness and resistance against systemic oppression, urging individuals to utilize their intellect and resources strategically. Addressing and combating white supremacy through intellectual and cultural empowerment is a central concern. Anderson advocates for an African-centered futurist perspective that emphasizes creating historical context and future pathways through informed action. This perspective requires a critical engagement with the past, a clear understanding of the present, and a visionary approach to the future. The challenges faced by scholars in Afrocentric discourse and the struggle for respect in academia are also highlighted. Anna Everett's contributions to Afrocentricity are acknowledged, as are the historical challenges of harassment and lack of respect faced by black scholars. Anderson also advises against accepting financial support that could compromise ethical integrity in activism, citing instances where movements were exploited for personal gain. Dr. Anderson emphasizes the urgency of youth perspectives in shaping the future, critiquing older generations for being disconnected from current social issues affecting marginalized communities. He encourages young people to vote and to bring their fearless perspectives to challenge the status quo. The high culture of the African diaspora, encompassing art, science, and philosophy, is celebrated. The successful Carnegie Hall Festival, which showcased African arts and culture, is cited as an example of cultural achievement. Anderson defines high culture through dimensions including metaphysics, aesthetics, science, and social sciences. Highlighting the holistic nature of African intellectual traditions, the African worldview as expressed in art and media representation is explored, with Black Panther serving as a prime example. Despite criticisms of its political portrayal and Hollywood's commercial interests, the film is acknowledged for its representation of African cosmology and cultural metaphysics. Anderson contrasts the origins of Black speculative literature with European science fiction, noting that the former arose as a response to scientific racism and the historical oppression of Africans. The debate over labeling and recognition reveals the tensions between seeking mainstream accolades and preserving cultural authenticity. He also connects speculative fiction to African American political thought, citing writers like Charlotte Perkins Gilman and H.G. Wells, and emphasizes the rich intellectual traditions that link African cultural contributions to theoretical physics. The discussion concludes with an examination of global dynamics through foresight, insight, and oversight. The impacts of the Ukraine war, including food scarcity in Africa, are discussed, along with the concept of deglobalization and the need for local manufacturing and greater representation for Africa in global governance. Anderson critiques NATO's historical role in Africa and highlights the media's neglect of ongoing issues on the continent. The complexities of global power dynamics and African agency are further explored, with Anderson emphasizing Africa's desire for autonomy and development. He also addresses the challenges faced by Black employees in authority positions, reflecting on the shifts from multiculturalism to diversity and the ongoing struggles in workplace hierarchies. The political complexities and economic strategies of Black institutions, such as HBCUs, are examined, along with the critique of leadership and representation within the African American community. Anderson emphasizes the need for increased activism and awareness, citing the loss of Black congressional representation in Detroit as an example of the consequences of disorganization. Afrofuturism is presented as a survival worldview amid societal changes, emphasizing the importance of roots and growth in forging an identity. Anderson highlights the need for new perspectives beyond traditional organizations to address current societal challenges. Dr. Anderson emphasizes the responsibility to support and uplift the Black community, advocating for authentic representation and reflecting on the promise made to assist others in the community. He stresses the importance of education and action for community leadership and progress, urging individuals to study past movements to avoid repeating old mistakes and to plan future actions. Anderson emphasizes the importance of honoring ancestors in the fight for justice and freedom, calling for collective responsibility to continue the struggle against oppression. In essence, Dr. Reynaldo Anderson's discourse provides a comprehensive framework for understanding the past, present, and future of the African American community. It is a call to action, urging individuals to embrace Afrofuturism as a tool for liberation, critical analysis, and visionary thinking.